The porch light was on. I always turned it off before long trips. 30 years working construction sites burned that habit into me. Lights meant electricity. Electricity meant money. I sat in my truck at the end of the gravel drive, engine idling, stomach tightening in a way I couldn't explain. Nearly midnight. The lake beyond the trees black and still. The cabin windows glowing warm. Then I saw the second car parked near the shed. Something sleek. Something that didn't belong. I cut the engine and sat there listening to my own heartbeat. I'd driven 8 hours straight to get home. 3 weeks on a job site 2 counties over, sleeping in bad motels, eating bad food. All I'd wanted was to step inside, crack a beer, and breathe in the old pine smell that still reminded me of my father. When I finally walked to the porch, the screen door opened before I reached the steps. A woman I had never seen in my life stood in my doorway, holding a mug like she'd earned it.
Steam rising into the cold night air. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has knocked on the wrong door. "Can I help you?" she asked. I told her my name. I told her this was my house. She smiled the way people do when they've already decided you're lying. "That's not what I was told," she said, and she closed the door halfway. My name is Daniel Cross. My father built that cabin after the divorce, after the layoffs, after the world had taken enough from him that all he wanted was quiet water and land nobody could argue about. He built it himself, every board, every nail. He left it to me when his heart finally gave out. I promised him I'd keep it simple, work hard, retire early, fish in the mornings, fix things that broke. That promise felt very far away as I stood frozen in my own kitchen at midnight, surrounded by dishes I didn't recognize, a throw blanket folded over my father's chair, expensive fabric completely wrong, and the faint smell of someone else's perfume in a room built with calloused hands. The woman's name was Leah. She told me she was caretaking the property, produced a folder full of documents that looked official enough to make my head swim, spoke calmly, patiently, as if she'd rehearsed. Told me the property had been reported as neglected, that arrangements had been made. When I told her I'd been gone 3 weeks, not 3 months, she nodded sympathetically, like I was the confused one. Before I could push back, there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. Someone had called in a disturbance. I stood in my own doorway while strangers discussed my house like it was an item at auction. The officers looked at Leia's paperwork, asked me to step outside while they sorted things out, and left 2 hours later having resolved absolutely nothing. Civil matter, they said, best handled through proper channels. Leia went back inside like the whole thing had been a minor inconvenience. I stood in the driveway, alone, staring at the ruts in the gravel, wondering how the ground beneath my feet could suddenly feel so unstable. The next few days taught me something I wish I'd learned differently. Paperwork that looks official can move faster than the truth. Every county office I called bounced me to another desk. Documents I'd never seen bore my name in handwriting that wasn't mine. Utility accounts showed activity during weeks I'd been sleeping in motels 2 counties away. Leia's confidence grew as mine shrank. She started using the front porch in the mornings, stretching with a coffee mug, nodding politely when I passed. Once, she reminded me to lock the shed because equipment had been going missing around the lake lately. The audacity of it left me speechless. Then I found the shed. I'd gone to check on it one afternoon and heard voices inside. Laughter, music, the smell of incense drifting through the cracked door. When I looked through the window, my hands started shaking. Rugs on the floor, candles, a massage table where my tools used to be. That night I found the website. Professional photos, glowing reviews, private lakeside retreat experience. My dock in every picture. The dock my father and I rebuilt together after a bad winter storm. When I confronted Leia, she didn't deny it. She smiled almost kindly and said I should be grateful the property was finally being appreciated. I told her she was trespassing. She shrugged and said I should talk to her associate. She handed me a business card. Property Solutions Consultant. I understood then. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan. And I was supposed to be easy. The worst moment came on a Tuesday night. I was looking for my father's journal, a spiral notebook he'd kept for years. Nothing valuable to anyone else, just weather notes, fish patterns, sketches of the cabin as he'd imagined it before he built it. I tore the house apart. When I asked Leia, she claimed ignorance. Then she said,
Maybe I'd misplaced it during one of my episodes. She said it quietly, carefully, like she'd been waiting to say it. I understood the move immediately. Make me look unstable, unreliable, the kind of man whose word doesn't hold up against a folder full of stamped documents. That night I called my daughter. I hadn't wanted to involve her. She had her own life, her own career. I'd always believed parents were supposed to shield their children from things like this, but I was running out of road. She listened without interrupting, asked sharp questions, requested copies of everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that cut straight through weeks of fog. Dad, this isn't a property dispute. This is a playbook. She flew in 2 days later with a laptop and legal pads and a focus that reminded me of her mother. We spread everything across the table. Timelines, documents, inconsistencies. She showed me cases from other states, different names, different Properties, identical tactics. Confident intermediaries with official-looking paperwork. Psychological pressure designed to exhaust people until they gave up or ran out of money. I wasn't a person to them. I was a target selected because I was supposed to be easy. 2 nights later, my motion alerts screamed at midnight. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. The smell hit me before I saw anything. Gasoline. I shouted. The figures near the shed scattered into the trees. I stood there in the dark, hands shaking, staring at the shed door soaked in accelerant, the ground around it black and wet. If I'd arrived 10 minutes later, the cabin would have been gone. My father's cabin. His whole second life after the world knocked him down. Everything he built and left me so I'd have somewhere solid to stand. Gone. That was the night everything changed. Fire investigators came, then county deputies asking sharper questions than before. Then my daughter made calls she'd been holding back, and within days there were federal agents in my driveway asking about patterns across state lines. The consultant's name came up in rooms I wasn't in. Leia stopped smiling. I'll tell you about the moment I felt the shift. I was near the dock one evening when Leia cornered me. Her composure was gone, voice sharp. She accused me of ruining her livelihood, of escalating things that didn't need to be escalated. I told her calmly she'd never had the right to be there. She laughed and stepped closer and said, rights were flexible, that everything came down to leverage, that there were still consequences I hadn't felt yet. I didn't respond. I turned and walked away. It was the first time her words had no power over me. 2 nights later, they came back, more of them this time, moving toward the cabin with an intent that was unmistakable on camera. They didn't make it far. Lights flooded the property. Commands rang out. Federal agents and deputies moved through the yard, and in minutes, it was over. Not just trespassers. People connected to firms and entities with names and histories and other properties in other states. Leia vacated the cabin under supervision the following morning. I watched her carry boxes to a waiting car, and I felt nothing dramatic. No celebration, no rage. Just a woman who had bet on the wrong target, finally leaving. The trial came months later. By then, the facts had hardened into something solid. Charts and timelines, expert testimony, digital records that spoke without emotion. The same steps repeated across places I'd never been, with people I'd never met, all aimed at the same quiet outcome. Possession without resistance. Leia looked smaller on the stand than I remembered. The consultant never testified. Documents spoke for him instead. The verdicts came quietly. I didn't stay for sentencing. I drove home, parked on the gravel, and sat for a moment looking at the cabin. Porch light off, just like I'd left. That evening I took my father's journal down to the dock. They'd returned it during the investigation, every page intact. I sat there reading his handwriting in the fading light, his notes about weather, his sketches of this place before it existed, his quiet belief that some things were worth building carefully and protecting fiercely. I added a page of my own. I wrote about the night I came home to a lit porch and a stranger in my doorway, about the weeks that followed, about learning that the people who try to erase you are counting on one thing above everything else, that you'll be too tired to remember what you're fighting for. I closed the notebook and set it on the shelf where it belonged. The lake was still, the trees were quiet, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night.
If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like a stranger in your own life. And if someone is quietly trying to wear you down right now, don't disappear.
They're counting on you too.